Avoidants always crumble when you finally understand this. You've been chasing clarity in a relationship that keeps you in confusion. The person you're drawn to, the one who gives just enough to keep you holding on, but not enough to ever feel secure, yeah, that's the avoidant. And here's the truth they never want you to figure out. Avoidants only keep their power as long as you don't understand yours. Today, I'm going to show you what happens when you stop playing their game and why the whole dynamic falls apart the moment you do. Avoidants often operate under the illusion of control, and that illusion is sustained by one critical tactic: emotional distance. They appear composed, mysterious, hard to read. They text just enough to keep you engaged, but pull away the moment things feel too intimate. And their behavior is so unpredictable, you start trying to decode every interaction. You wonder what you did wrong when they suddenly go quiet, or why they seem so invested one moment and cold the next. But the real secret is this: it's not about you. It's about them. Avoidants have learned somewhere along the way that closeness is dangerous. Emotional intimacy feels like vulnerability, and vulnerability feels like a threat. Confuse themselves by keeping others at arm's length. And the best way to maintain that distance? Confuse the other person just enough that they're always trying to earn love, not receive it freely. This creates a dynamic where you're the one chasing, trying harder, doing more. You start feeling off balance, like if you could just say the right thing or be a little more patient, they'd finally open up. But this is where the illusion gets powerful. You think they have control because they're pulling away, when in reality, they're simply reacting to their own fear. They're not leading from strength. They're hiding from connection. The moment you begin to see this clearly, the power dynamic shifts. Their silence no longer feels like a punishment. Their flakiness no longer feels personal. You stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" and start asking, "Why do I keep accepting so little?" And that is the beginning of the unraveling. Because the avoidant thrives when you doubt yourself. The less you trust your own needs, the more you chase them. But once you recognize that their behavior is rooted in avoidance, not truth, their power starts to dissolve. You realize they aren't distant because they're better, wiser, or more secure. They're distant because they're afraid. Afraid of being seen, afraid of being known, afraid that love will somehow cost them more than it gives. And once you recognize that, you stop seeing their distance as mysterious or desirable. You start seeing it for what it is, a coping mechanism. And the moment you do, everything changes, because the illusion can only hold when you don't understand the trick. But now you do. And that understanding is the first step to taking your power back. Your attention is the currency in any relationship. And with avoidance, it's the fuel that keeps the entire dynamic running. They may act indifferent, detached, or unavailable, but make no mistake, they notice when you're paying attention. Every time you reach out after they pull away, every time you try to fix the distance, every time you agonize over what you could say to make them respond, you're giving them power. They don't need to say anything because your pursuit says it all. They matter more to you than you matter to yourself in that moment. This is how the cycle continues. You feel anxious, they go cold, and instead of pulling back and protecting your own peace, you double down on trying to win them over. You tell yourself it's love, you tell yourself it's patience or understanding, but what it really is, often, is fear. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear that maybe you're not enough unless they say you are. Avoidants feed off that imbalance. It validates their unconscious belief that closeness is unsafe and that they can maintain control by keeping you one step behind. Your attention becomes their emotional safety net. They don't have to show up fully because they know you'll do the emotional labor for both of you, right? Here's where everything starts to shift. The moment you recognize that your energy is a resource, not a free handout, you change the rules of the game. When you start withdrawing the constant supply of attention, when you stop over-explaining yourself, when you stop reaching out every time there's silence, you stop feeding the imbalance. You start sending a different message. I matter too. And for the avoidant, that message is both foreign and unsettling. They're used to being chased, not challenged. They're used to being understood without having to offer understanding. So when your focus turns inward, when your self-respect becomes louder than your need for validation, they feel the shift and it disrupts the dynamic completely, not because you're punishing them, but because you're no longer rewarding emotional distance. You begin to see how much of your energy was going into trying to be chosen by someone who was never offering you certainty. And with that awareness, you start to reclaim the attention you were giving so freely and redirect it toward yourself, not in bitterness, but in clarity. Because the person who wins in love isn't the one who gets the most attention. It's the one who values their own enough not to waste it. Detachment isn't about being cold. It's not about shutting down or pretending you don't care. Real detachment is about reclaiming your emotional balance. It's the moment when you stop letting someone else's inconsistency dictate your self-worth. With avoidance, this is a game changer because their power lies in your reactivity. As long as they can trigger you, get a reaction, provoke worry, or make you feel uncertain, they stay in control. But once you detach, you remove their ability to shake your center. When you're emotionally entangled with an avoidant, every silence feels like a punishment. Every delay in response feels personal. You start to believe that if you just wait long enough, stay patient enough, love hard enough, they'll come around. But this mindset keeps you in emotional limbo, reacting to their every move like you're trying to decode a puzzle. You give them the authority to determine whether you feel secure or not. And that's where you start to lose yourself. Detachment flips this. It says, I see your behavior and I no longer need to personalize it. It means recognizing that someone's emotional avoidance isn't a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of their discomfort with intimacy. You stop asking, why are they pulling away? And instead ask, why am I still tolerating emotional distance? This kind of detachment creates space for you to think clearly, act intentionally, and most importantly, protect your peace. You stop checking your phone constantly. You stop rewriting the last message in your head. You stop waiting for someone else to choose you. Detachment allows you to observe without absorbing. You can still care, but from a distance that respects your dignity. And what's most powerful is that avoidants notice this. They sense when you're no longer orbiting them emotionally. The reactions they used to rely on, gone. The anxious pull they could count on, silent. And that silence speaks louder than any words ever could. This isn't about playing games. It's about ending the game entirely. When you detach, you stop being a participate in a dynamic where someone else's fear dictates your emotional rhythm. You return to yourself. You listen to your needs. You stop making excuses for someone's absence and start making space for someone who actually shows up. Detachment doesn't mean you stop love. And the moment you make that shift, you become unshakable, not because you're closed off, but because you finally know who you are without needing someone else to validate it. Consistency is like a mirror. It reflects back everything that isn't real. When you begin to show up with emotional consistency, clarity, and calm intention, it does something avoidants are rarely prepared for. It exposes the inconsistency they've spent so long hiding behind. Avoidants operate best in the fog. They thrive where there's just enough confusion to keep things vague, undefined, and emotionally distant. But when you introduce consistency into the dynamic, when your words match your actions, when your expectations are clear, when you're not swinging between highs and lows, they can't hide anymore. Suddenly, the contrast becomes sharp. Your stability brings their instability into focus. Your emotional honesty makes their defensiveness more noticeable. Your steady pace makes their pattern of pulling away feel obvious. It becomes harder for them to pretend they don't see it, and harder for you to keep excusing it. What felt like mystery now feels like avoidance. What felt like complexity now looks like fear. And this is where things start to shift. Not because you confront them with anger or demands, but because your calm presence becomes a silent truth they can't escape. Avoidants are used to being mirrored by anxiety. When they pull away, they expect pursuit. When they go silent, they expect you to fill the space. That dance makes them feel powerful, in control, emotionally safe. But when you don't respond with chaos, when you simply remain grounded, they don't know how to relate to you anymore. They're confronted with a new reality. They either have to step up emotionally or fall out of rhythm completely. And here's the interesting part. They often do begin to crumble. Not in a dramatic way, but in subtle moments of discomfort. They feel the weight of their own inconsistency. They realize they can't blame your reactions anymore because you're not reacting. You're responding with patience, with clarity, with grace. And the more consistent you become, the more you reclaim your emotional space. Consistency also teaches you something vital. It shows you who someone really is, not who they could be. You stop clinging to potential and start watching patterns. You stop hoping they'll change and start seeing what they consistently choose. And from that place, you make better decisions. You no longer try to earn love. You simply offer it with honesty and let people show whether they're capable of meeting you there. Because when you're consistent, their inconsistency is no longer confusing. It becomes your answer. Boundaries are not about control. They're about clarity. In relationships with avoidance, the absence of boundaries is what keeps you stuck in confusion. You begin to tolerate mixed signals, ghosting, sudden emotional distance, and bare minimum communication because part of you believes that being understanding will win them over. But what actually happens is this. Every time you ignore your own discomfort, you reinforce the idea that their behavior is acceptable. You teach them that you will adapt, bend, and shrink yourself to maintain the connection. That is the cost of unspoken boundaries. Avoidants are not necessarily malicious. They often don't even realize the impact of their behavior, but they are comfortable with space and uncomfortable with emotional accountability. The more you accommodate their fear of intimacy, the more they settle into patterns that leave you emotionally starved. This is where boundaries become essential, not as a way to punish, but as a way to protect. When you say, I'm not available for inconsistency, or I need communication I can rely on, you're not asking for too much. You're asking for the bare minimum required to sustain a real connection. And here's what makes boundaries powerful. They are not demands. They are standards. You don't beg someone to rise to them. You simply let your actions show that you're willing to walk away if they don't. Avoidants are used to others shifting to accommodate them. They're not used to someone calmly saying, that doesn't work for me, and meaning it. So when you do, it disrupts the pattern. Suddenly they're faced with a version of you that's grounded, self-respecting, and unwilling to settle for crumbs. What's even more revealing is how they respond. Some may step up. Others will retreat even further. But either way, you gain clarity. You stop guessing, you stop managing their emotions, and you stop prioritizing your own. Boundaries bring light to a dynamic that survives in the shadows. They expose what's real and what's performative. They show you who's capable of meeting you, not just when it's easy, but when it matters. Most importantly, boundaries break the illusion that love means self-sacrifice. Real love doesn't ask you to abandon your needs to prove your worth. It respects your limits. It honors your emotional safety. And when you set those limits with calm confidence, avoidants often don't know how to respond because they're not used to someone who values themselves more than the chase. Healing is the plot twist that changes everything. Not just for you, but for the entire dynamic you once felt trapped in. When you begin to heal, to truly prioritize your emotional well-being, you stop relating to love from a place of fear. You stop searching for worth in the approval of someone who can't meet you. You stop trying to earn connection through suffering. And that shift is so powerful, it unravels the foundation that avoidant dynamics are built on. Avoidants operate in a space where emotional distance is their safety net. They pull back when things get too close. They shut down when vulnerability enters the room, and they rely on your anxiety to maintain control. But healing strips away your anxiety. It gives you clarity. It builds an inner calm that doesn't flinch when someone pulls away, because you no longer take it as evidence of your inadequacy. Healing means you begin to recognize your patterns, why you stayed, why you tolerated less, why you kept giving chances. But instead of shaming yourself, you meet those patterns with compassion. You start to understand your role, not as the broken one, but as someone who was simply repeating what felt familiar. And once you understand that, you get to rewrite the script. Suddenly, you're no longer attracted to emotional unavailability. What once felt exciting now feels exhausting. What used to trigger you now makes you pause and ask, is this even what I want anymore? The avoidant doesn't know what to do with that version of you. They weren't prepared to manage your anxiety, not your boundaries. They knew how to navigate your longing, not your self-respect. When you heal, you stop being reactive, you start being responsive. You don't need to chase closure because you understand that someone's inability to love you wasn't a reflection of your capacity to be. You don't need to prove anything. You just are. And that quiet confidence is magnetic and unsettling at the same time. Avoidants may begin to feel the weight of their own emotional limitations in your presence. They may sense they're no longer needed in the way they used to be, that their inconsistency no longer creates a hold over you. Some might try to re-engage, others may disappear completely. But your healing doesn't depend on either outcome, because once you've done the work, the whole dynamic flips. They either rise to meet your emotional depth, or they fall away, unable to exist in the light of your growth. And here's what I want you to take away from all of this. The power dynamic with an avoidant only feels real when you forget your own power. When you're stuck in self-doubt, overthinking every move, and bending to earn their closeness, it feels like they hold all the cards. But once you start seeing clearly, once you understand the pattern, recognize the illusion, and reclaim your standards, the entire game unravels. They don't crumble because you forced them to. They crumble because your healing removes the environment where their avoidance could thrive. They crumble because the silence that once controlled you now means nothing. They crumble because you finally realized you were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. You don't have to chase. You don't have to fix. You just have to see. And once you do, you don't lose them. You lose the version of you that thought you needed to earn love through pain. So protect your peace. Stay rooted in your standards. Choose clarity over chaos. And never forget, you are not hard to love. You're just finally choosing to stop settling for half love. Thank you for giving me your time, your energy, and your openness. If you heard something today that hit home, don't just let it sit. Let it shift you. You deserve real love, steady love, brave love, and it starts with how you love yourself. Take care of your heart. Thank you and goodbye.